Malik's breath fogged faintly in the cool night air as he adjusted the strap of his worn backpack. The streetlights overhead buzzed, some flickering like they were deciding whether to die or fight for another moment. A squad car rolled up too slow to be casual, tires crunching gravel like a warning. "Hands where I can see them," one officer barked. Malik lifted his hands, steady, eyes fixed on the yellow glow above instead of their sneers. His silence seemed to irritate them more than if he'd cursed. "What you out here for this late?" Another officer pressed, circling like a dog testing its prey. "Walking home," Malik said flatly, no tremor in his voice. The first officer smirked, patting at his belt. "Funny. Don't look like you own much worth going home to." Malik exhaled slowly. Inside, anger scraped at his ribs, but he wouldn't let it leak into his tone. He had learned that stillness was its own weapon. One officer flicked open a flashlight, beaming it into Malik's face. Eyes forward. "Don't get smart." The light cut harsh shadows across his jaw, but he didn't flinch. Their arrogance sharpened with his composure. The younger one muttered, "They think silence makes them innocent." Malik finally turned his gaze toward him, voice quiet but razor clean. "Or maybe silence shows who's really loud." For a second, the words hung heavier than the night itself. Even the streetlight above gave one last flicker before buzzing out, leaving them in half-darkness. The officers shifted, one clearing his throat like he'd swallowed something sharp. The air grew tight not from yelling, but from what remained unspoken, Malik's calm refusing to break where they expected collapse. The silence after Malik's last words stretched heavier than the night itself. One officer crouched low, fingers brushing the gravel before lifting a crumpled plastic packet into view. He held it with the ease of someone who had rehearsed the gesture too many times before. "Well, well," he said, shaking the bag as if it confirmed what he already believed. "Look what we found." Malik's eyes didn't move from the packet. His voice came calm, steady, quiet enough to force them to lean in to catch it. "That's not mine." The younger officer smirked, stepping closer. "They all say that," but Malik didn't break. His stillness was sharper than defiance. Narration filled the silence. He had seen this before. The planted guilt, the smug certainty of men who knew the system bent for them. The officer dangled the bag beside Malik's backpack. "Funny how it's right here, though." Malik finally shifted his gaze, meeting his eyes. "Funny how it wasn't, until you touched it." That line stopped them more than any outburst could. The smug grin flickered. The younger one cleared his throat, muttering, "Watch your tone." "I am," Malik answered, steady. "Are you?" The air tightened. The older officer looked around, suddenly aware of the dark windows above them, the possibility of unseen eyes. His certainty thinned. The packet hung in his hand like a weight he didn't want. Malik's refusal to panic had unsettled their rhythm, made their actions feel louder than intended. One officer stuffed the bag back into his pocket with a hurried motion, as if silence might erase what had just happened. But the fracture had already formed. Small, quiet, undeniable. A cough cracked the stillness first, then the faint click of a phone camera. Malik noticed the glow of screens appearing one by one, rising like quiet lanterns in the dark. People had gathered, neighbors stepping onto porches, strangers slowing their cars, a group of teenagers whispering as they held their phones high. One officer stiffened. "Put those down." "This isn't—" A woman's voice cut him off, calm but firm. "It is." The officer's jaw worked, but he didn't finish his order. His partner shifted uneasily, pocket heavy with the packet that was never Malik's. Malik kept his hands steady in the air, his voice low enough to force the microphones of those phones to strain. "You see it, don't you? You see what they tried." The silence of the crowd was louder than any chant. The soft hum of recording cameras carried more weight than shouting ever could. Narration slipped in like breath. For years, truth had been buried in shadows. Tonight, under broken lights and steady lenses, lies had nowhere to hide. A boy whispered, not to Malik, not to the officers, but to his phone, "They're planting it." They tried to plant it. That whisper spread through the crowd like dry grass catching fire. More screens lifted, more eyes locked on the scene. The older officer tugged at his collar, glancing at the rows of faces that weren't yelling, weren't interfering, just watching. And that watching was enough. Malik lowered his hands slowly, not defiant, not defeated, just deliberate. He let them see he wasn't afraid of being witnessed. The officer's voice faltered as he tried, "Disperse or—" No one moved. The silence pressed harder, sealing his words shut before they could leave. The words dropped heavy, dressed in a smirk that was meant to cut. "Guess you'll be spending the night in a cell, kid." The officer leaned closer, voice low, smug, almost playful. It wasn't just a threat. It was tradition, polished through years of unchecked power. Malik didn't flinch. His breath steadied, eyes fixed not on the officer but on the glowing screen surrounding them. "They hear you," he thought. "They see you. Kid," Malik finally said, voice quiet enough that silence wrapped around it. "I'm older than your smirk makes me look." The officer's jaw tightened. He had expected anger, maybe shouting, not calm words that made his own tone sound cheap. He glanced at his partner, who shifted uneasily, caught between loyalty and the pull of watching eyes. Narration seeped in. For men like him, power was often loud, a bark, a shove, a grin. But power begins to crumble the moment silence answers it. The officer forced a laugh, sharp and brittle. "Cell's waiting." "Don't matter what you think." Malik's reply was slower, weighted. "Doesn't matter what I think. It matters what they recorded." His chin tilted toward the crowd. Phones still burned like steady torches. The grin faltered only for a second, but long enough for the air to shift. A whisper from the crowd slipped through. "He's nervous." The officer's smirk held, but it wavered around the edges. He pulled back, pressing his lips into a tight line, hiding cracks that refused to stay hidden. Malik lowered his hands at last, calm and deliberate. He didn't need volume to answer. The silence, once heavy on him, now weighed squarely on the man who thought he owned the night. Boots scraped against the concrete as the officer nudged Malik forward. The smirk had cooled, but the push was sharp enough to remind him of the imbalance. A door groaned open, its metal echo spilling into the night. The crowd stayed outside, their silence still pressing through the walls. "Keep walking," the officer muttered, almost to himself. His grip was firm but not steady. Malik could feel the tremor in his hand. The hallway smelled of bleach and metal. Malik's voice cut through, quiet, measured. "Strange place to take me," the officer scoffed. "You'll get used to it." But his words didn't land. They hung, fragile, in a space that wasn't his. Narration filled the gap. Every brick, every key, every desk in that building carried his father's shadow. The cage they led him toward was not their triumph. It was their undoing. Another officer at the desk paused mid-paperwork. His eyes flicked up, recognition flashing quick before he masked it. The smirking one didn't notice, too intent on finishing what he started. "Cell 3, he barked. The keys jingled, but the sound wavered, echoing wrong. Malik stepped in, shoulders straight, eyes calm. "You don't even realize where you are, do you?" The officer frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" Malik didn't answer. He sat down on the hard bench, slow and deliberate. His silence spoke clearer than any outburst could. The second officer shifted uncomfortably, throat clearing. "We should double-check procedures," he murmured. The first officer snapped. "It's just a cell," but the walls disagreed. They carried a name he hadn't spoken, a weight he hadn't measured. And for the first time, the man with the smirk felt smaller than the silence pressing back at him. The keys clattered onto the desk, louder than necessary. The smirking officer leaned back, pretending calm, but his eyes twitched toward the locked drawer. Malik's gaze followed. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The second officer hesitated, then pulled the drawer open. Dust lifted with the motion, floating in the thin light. Stacks of worn files slid forward, edges yellowed, names scrawled in fading ink. One slipped free, landing on the floor with a dull slap. Malik bent, picked it up slowly. He read the name, lips pressed thin. A teenager's face stared back from a grainy photo, brown skin, hollow eyes. Underneath, possession with intent, the silence pressed heavy. Malik's voice broke it, low but steady. How old was he? 16? The second officer shifted. 17. 17. Malik repeated as if the number carried weight. His thumb traced the boy's picture. And where is he now? The answer didn't come. Narration crept in. The cries hadn't faded. They lived in the walls, in the air, in the silence men like this built to shield themselves. A mother once screamed in that very hallway, begging someone, anyone, to listen. The choice was made to turn away. The smirking officer snapped, "That's not relevant. Those cases are closed." Malik looked up, his calm cutting deeper than anger. Closed to you. Not to them. Not to the families who buried children while you filled reports with lies. The second officer's pen tapped against the desk, uneven, betraying the shift. His eyes wouldn't meet Malik's. The drawer remained open. The files remained visible, and the room felt smaller, as though the forgotten voices were crowding back in, demanding to be heard. The drawer stayed open, the files breathing dust into the room. Malik's silence lingered like a verdict no one wanted to hear. Footsteps approached from the back corridor. A man in a gray suit stopped just short of the desk, his eyes sweeping over the scattered folders. He didn't raise his voice. "This isn't the first time," he said quietly. The smirking officer stiffened. "Who are you?" "Internal Affairs." The words dropped with no ceremony, but they carried more weight than a shouted order. The second officer shifted, lowering his gaze. His tapping pen stilled, the smirking one scoffed, though his throat tightened. "You don't know what you're talking about." The newcomer's eyes rested on the photo Malik held. "I know exactly what I'm talking about. The names change. The ages change. But the stories?" His voice thinned, almost a whisper. "They don't." Narration pressed softly. Truth doesn't always roar. Sometimes it seeps through cracks, carried in voices too tired to shout but too burdened to stay silent. Malik finally spoke, tone even. "So you knew," the Internal Affairs officer swallowed, his jaw clenching. "We all knew. Fear makes cowards. Paperwork makes accomplices." His hand brushed over a folder, but he didn't take it. "I should have spoken sooner." The smirking officer's laugh came out brittle. "You'll ruin your career for this?" "For him?" The reply was low, sharp. "Careers end. Silence lasts longer." The hallway beyond hummed with unseen ears, whispers waiting to spread. Malik sat back, his calm presence turning the air heavier. The smirk faltered for good this time, leaving only the weight of what had been spoken where silence once stood. The clang of the cell door echoed, metal against metal, but Malik didn't flinch. The smirk from the officer lingered for a second, waiting for fear, waiting for a crack. None came. Malik sat down slowly on the edge of the bench, his posture upright, his breathing steady. "You think this makes you strong?" the officer muttered, lingering near the bars. Malik's voice was low, measured. "Strong men don't need cages to feel powerful." The words settled heavy, cutting through the stale air. The officer scoffed, but his eyes darted away as if avoiding a mirror he didn't want to face. Narration traced the silence. Malik remembered his mother's voice, soft but firm. "They will try to take your pride first. Don't let them." That memory became his shield, stronger than iron bars could ever be. The officer leaned closer, trying again. "You'll break." "They all do." Malik lifted his gaze, calm and unshaken. "Maybe they break because you expect them to. But I'm not here for your expectations." A pause. The officer swallowed, suddenly unsure if he was still the one in control. Another voice, distant down the hall, called the officer's name. He lingered, almost reluctant to leave the quiet defiance pressing against him. Malik folded his hands, steady. His silence spoke louder than protest. Each second, without begging, without fear, stripped the officer's power away. Narration pressed like a whisper. In stillness, Malik did not lose himself. He reclaimed himself. His calm was not surrender but resistance, a mirror reflecting how small hate looked when faced with dignity that would not bend. The officer turned at last, muttering under his breath, but it sounded more like retreat than triumph. Boots echoed down the hallway before his figure appeared. Captain Harris did not rush. His steps were slow, deliberate, each one carrying the weight of knowledge the others pretended didn't exist. The chatter that usually filled the precinct fell into uneasy silence. Papers were shuffled, phones lifted to ears, but no one dared look directly at him. An officer near the desk cleared his throat, whispering, "He knows." The words spread like fire in dry grass. Eyes darted to the holding cell, then back to Harris, who finally stopped, his stare fixed on the bars that held his son. "Who signed the report?" His voice was quiet, but no one mistook it for calm. Silence. Chairs creaked. A sergeant shifted uncomfortably. "Answer me." The sergeant swallowed. We followed protocol, sir." Harris's eyes narrowed. "Protocol doesn't plant lies. Protocol doesn't target my son." Narration pressed in. The room was suddenly smaller, the walls tighter. Men who once barked orders now shrank into their uniforms, their confidence dissolving under the shadow of command. One officer stepped forward, his words shaky. "Captain, it wasn't personal." Harris's jaw tightened. He leaned closer, voice low enough to burn. "It's always personal when it's a black boy in your hands." "Don't lie to me." The officer froze, lips parting, but no words came. Harris didn't need more. His silence carried judgment sharper than any punishment. Malik, from behind the bars, watched quietly. He saw his father not roaring, but dismantling power with restraint. The air thickened further as Harris turned his back on them, speaking only once more. "Every action leaves a record, and this one will not be buried." No one moved. The silence was heavier than chains. The small plastic bag dangled from Harris's hand, its weight heavier than bricks on the men watching. He didn't slam it down. He didn't raise his voice. He simply let the silence drag, the evidence swinging between his fingers like a pendulum marking the end of their lies. "Who signed off on this?" His tone was flat, but every syllable carved into the room. No one answered. A chair scraped faintly. Sweat glistened on brows once smug with power. "Don't play dumb," Harris continued, eyes scanning the faces. "Paperwork doesn't file itself. Someone put ink to this lie." One officer shifted. "Captain?" "We thought." "You thought what?" Harris's gaze locked on him, unblinking. "That no one would look too closely? That my son would sit in a cage built from your arrogance?" Narration pressed in. The bag was no longer just drugs. It was betrayal, years of corruption pressed into plastic. And in Harris's grip, it became a mirror none of them wanted to face. The youngest officer muttered, almost to himself. It was procedure. Harris's voice cut back like steel. "Procedure doesn't frame boys. Procedure doesn't bury innocence to protect pride." "Don't insult me." A thick pause swallowed the air. The men exchanged glances, loyalty faltering under the weight of exposure. Their silence betrayed them louder than words ever could. Malik, still behind bars, spoke softly, his first words in hours. "Funny how evidence only scares the guilty." The words landed heavy. Heads turned toward him, but no one dared respond. Harris lowered the bag onto the desk. He didn't slam it. He didn't need to. His final words lingered like judgment. "This room just chose who it truly serves. And trust me, I'll remember every face." The silence that followed was suffocating. The microphones crackled before anyone spoke. The officers sat rigid, ties straightened, faces drained. Cameras did not blink. They caught every twitch, every darting glance, every shallow breath. The room wasn't loud, it didn't need to be. Silence pressed down heavier than any shout. The mayor leaned forward, his tone calm. "You know what's worse than planting lies?" His eyes moved slowly across the front row of uniforms. "Believing the world won't see," no one answered. One officer swallowed hard. The sound carried farther than he meant. A reporter raised her hand, voice steady. "Mayor, do you believe these men acted alone?" He paused, long enough for every camera to focus closer. "I believe power has a way of protecting itself." "But not today," murmurs rippled. An officer shifted in his chair, clearing his throat. We followed protocol, he muttered, though his voice betrayed him. The mayor's gaze didn't move. Protocol doesn't come with baggies of powder. The room stilled again. Reporters scribbled, lenses zoomed in. One officer looked down at his hands, knuckles white, thumb trembling. Another tried to steady his voice. This is a misunderstanding. Stop! The mayor's word cut sharper than any accusation. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Silence stretched, heavier now, suffocating. Behind the cameras, the public leaned closer through screens and live feeds. They saw men who once towered over streets now shrinking under light. The mayor sat back, composed. The truth doesn't stutter. It stands. And it waits. One lens clicked, then another. The flashing grew relentless. None of the officers dared lift their eyes. The cameras would not blink, and the silence became their trial. The footage began without warning. A shaky frame, the officer's heavy breathing, a hand slipping a small bag into the back seat. The room froze. Every screen showed the same truth. No edits, no excuses. Just raw betrayal. Gasps broke the silence. Reporters leaned forward, pens forgotten. The sound of the mayor's voice came low, almost too calm. That's not protocol. That's intent. One officer jerked upright, stammering. It's out of context. You don't know what happened before. The mayor cut in. Steady. Context doesn't put powder in an empty car. The camera swung to the officer's paling face. His lips trembled, but no words followed. The body cam didn't blink. It replayed the act again. Slower. Crueler. The truth looped like punishment, a reporter whispered, not hiding her disgust. How many times has this been done before? The question hung heavy. No officer dared meet her eyes. One shifted, muttered under his breath, "Turn it off." But no one moved. The footage kept rolling. The lie unraveled in real time, shredding every claim of innocence. The mayor leaned back, hands folded, voice even softer now. You didn't just frame a man. You framed yourselves. The words landed harder than any gavel sweat pooled on brows. Shoulders sagged. The officers were no longer enforcers of law, but men cornered by their own hands. The room wasn't filled with shouting, only the quiet weight of collapse. Every lens, every reporter, every viewer watching from their screens had witnessed the moment arrogance cracked wide open. The lie was gone. What remained was silence, raw and unfixable. The courtroom was still buzzing from the footage, but the sound of the gavel cut through, sharp and final. The judge's eyes swept across the room, then landed on Captain Harris. His words came steady without tremor. Justice is not vengeance. It is the truth. No one moved. The officers sat rigid, their uniforms suddenly too heavy. Malik turned his head slowly, eyes wet but unblinking. For the first time, he wasn't a man on trial. He was the man finally heard. The prosecutor shifted in her chair. Your Honor, in light of the evidence, we motion for immediate dismissal of charges. The judge nodded once, gavel striking again. Granted. Malik Johnson is free. The silence that followed carried more weight than applause ever could. Malik's mother clutched her hands together, lips trembling but no sound escaping. The bailiff approached the officers, voice clipped. You'll remain seated until Internal Affairs arrives, one of them muttered. This is a mistake. But the words fell flat, weak against the room's new balance. Malik rose, his legs almost uncertain beneath him. He turned toward Harris. You believed me, when nobody else did. Harris didn't smile, didn't grandstand. He simply answered, the truth always waits. Sometimes too long, but it waits. The officers looked down at the table, shame creeping into places arrogance once lived. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked, yet the loudest thing in the room was restraint. The judge's gavel struck one final time. Each echo seemed to split the old walls of silence, leaving cracks wide enough for truth to seep through. And Malik, with a quiet dignity, walked out, not shouting, not breaking, but free. The precinct hallways echoed with the sound of metal doors shutting, one after another. The officers who once carried themselves with pride now moved like shadows, shoulders bent, eyes fixed on the floor. Not a single hand reached out to them, not a nod. not even a whispered word of support. At his locker, one officer muttered, "We were just doing the job." His voice cracked in the silence. Another, stuffing belongings into a cardboard box, snapped back, "No, we got caught. That's the difference." The room fell into a heavier stillness. Colleagues who once laughed at their jokes now turned their backs, unwilling to meet their eyes. Phones buzzed with notifications, screens glowing with headlines, replaying the body cam footage again and again. There was no escaping the truth anymore. It followed them like a shadow in every reflection. One younger officer lingered at the doorway, watching. He whispered almost to himself, "Nobody's standing up for you." The disgraced sergeant slammed his locker shut, the sound hollow. They'll forget. People always forget. But even he didn't believe it. His hands trembled as he tried to lift the box. His authority, once unquestioned, had collapsed in silence. Captain Harris passed through the corridor, his presence calm, his gaze unflinching. He didn't speak a word. He didn't need to. The simple act of walking past them without acknowledgement, without recognition, cut deeper than any sentence a judge could deliver. One of the men lowered his head, whispering, "It's over," and the truth was, it had ended not with sirens or protests, but with isolation, colleagues stepping aside, neighbors crossing the street, and a community that no longer looked away. The fall came quietly. No defense, no shield, just silence. The wood beneath Malik creaked as he leaned back, phone glowing faintly in his hand. Message after message scrolled past, neighbors apologizing, strangers offering prayers, community leaders promising change. He read them quietly, his thumb pausing over the words, but his face remained steady. Across the street, Mrs. Carter, the old woman who once crossed the road to avoid him, stood at her gate. She didn't wave, didn't speak. She just watched. Malik raised his eyes slowly, meeting hers. For a moment, silence stretched between them. Then, almost imperceptibly, she nodded. His younger cousin, Andre, stepped onto the porch. "Man, you see this? They're calling you a hero online." Malik exhaled, eyes fixed ahead. "I'm not a hero. I just didn't break." Andre shifted, restless. "But after what they did, don't you wanna—" Malik cut him off softly. "No, let the truth do the shouting." The street, once filled with suspicion and whispers, now carried a different weight. Children rode bikes without their parents pulling them away. A man in a suit passed by and offered a small, respectful nod. Every gesture, every glance, spoke louder than the headlines. Andre leaned on the railing, voice quieter now. "You think it'll last? Or people just talking until the next story comes?" Malik's gaze lingered on the horizon. "Doesn't matter, they saw. They can't unsee it." A car slowed near the curb. Its driver, an officer off duty, hesitated before rolling down his window. "Malik, for what it's worth, I'm sorry." Malik held his stare, steady, calm. No anger, no smile, just silence. And in that silence, the apology found its weight. The porch became his pulpit, his quiet, the loudest sermon yet. The corridor was longer than Harris remembered, the same cracked tiles underfoot, the same stale coffee smell clinging to the walls. Only the air had changed. It carried a weight, a silence that pressed on every man in uniform as he passed. No one dared speak. No one dared look him in the eye. The same officers who once sneered at him now studied the floor as if their boots might explain away their shame. "Morning, Captain," one muttered, voice low, almost swallowed before it reached the air. Harris slowed. "Mayor," he corrected gently. The man flinched, nodding fast. Every step was a memory. His son's name dragged through mud. Briggs's grin when the cuffs clicked shut. The whispers in the courtroom when truth finally cracked the surface. Harris didn't need to raise his voice then, and he wouldn't now. Silence had done the work. At the end of the hall, Briggs stood against the wall, stripped of his badge, wearing the look of a man still searching for excuses. His lips parted, then closed again. "You ruined everything," he whispered. Harris met his eyes for the first time. "No," he said evenly. "You did." The words hung between them, sharper than any shout. Briggs's shoulders sagged, the weight finally breaking him. Around them, the silence deepened. Heavy as judgment, Harris turned, walking toward the exit, his coat brushing the walls like a final sentence. Narration lingered in his thoughts. Justice doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers, and the same silence that once crushed us now buries them. He stepped into the daylight, leaving behind a precinct that no longer ruled him, but trembled under the weight of its own echoes.